And I want to thank you for the work that you do for the city. I know a lot of the division heads and folks from the city are here, and I want to tell you how much I appreciate your work. And it is an honor to represent Alexandria at home here in Alexandria, and it's an honor to represent us around the state. And believe me, people are talking, and they're talking about us very positively around the state, and it's an honor to represent us outside of the state. And I think you should be proud, too, of our city. Where it's come in the last 20 years is important. Where it is going is probably the most important thing that we can all do together and have been doing for some time, but that we can continue to think about together. The state of Alexandria is quite sound. The statement is best supported not by words from me or folks around City Hall, but as exemplified in our latest bond rating, which has crept up from an A to a AA minus. That meaning is very significant to Alexandria, and you should consider the other things that go along with that bond rating increasing to a AA minus. Consider the hospital expansion that you're seeing, the continued expansion and growth of healthcare or healthcare ancillary services in our city and region. You should consider that we continue to be a manufacturing and distribution hub for this area, and we really see the chance. I think Elton, who is with the Chamber, and others would agree, certainly Mr. Grafton, Mr. Ranson, and many others, the potential for intermodality, or the use of all of our forms of transportation, rail, air, water, and interstate, offer us the opportunity, if planned correctly, to become something of a distribution center in the South. So we're not just talking local, regional, we're talking about in our larger region in an interstate fashion, and that is really important for us to consider. With regard to seeking out business and bringing what we call the big fish here, Rick and Elton, again in the room, know this practice very well. That is something that's very important, and as a lot of folks are fond of saying, we're not going to land them all, guys. You can't. The state doesn't, no one can, but we're going to land quite a few, and we're going to land significant ones. More importantly, however, we have to remember that we need to consider that expanding and retaining, so expansion and retention of existing business, the backbone that's already here of our community, is the most important thing we can do from a commerce, private industry end. We have to remember that, and we have to keep a laser-like focus on doing that. We have to provide them proper infrastructure and a business-friendly environment. I still hear stories from time to time about issues of people trying to get permits and move through that process. Sometimes it's because of things on their end that they don't do, and they're going to be quick to go after the city for it. But I understand that that environment has to exist where you know where you stand. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. It's important that when you approach a public entity, the things are in place that allow you to know the rules of the road, a roadmap. I start here and I get here. And that is important in terms of what we call objective modeling here at the city, and increasing that objective modeling. You are seeing that at a statewide level. Governor Jindal's programs certainly have upset the apple cart for some folks, I'm sure, but it's about objective modeling. You're seeing the placement of things that change the way things have been done, and whether you like it or not, at the end of the day, if you all are on the same page when you approach government to do things, over time, it makes it better. Everyone knows where they stand, and they stand on equal footing, and that's critical. We're embarking now on a reinvestment plan, which I believe will herald a new day. It will alter, update, and lift this community. And I think that we all should very carefully consider those plans as they are vetted and go through the process of determining their efficacy, the ability to move forward on them. But I think more importantly, we have to be together. And you have to have honest dialogue to do that. It's okay to disagree. That's what transparency, that's what government and the interaction it has with citizens who pay the taxes, who pay the salaries of me and every other person who works for the city. That's what it's about. But at the end of the day, you have to achieve convergence. You have to try to achieve consensus to move things forward. That takes compromise. That takes considering the needs of all of the community instead of just a few. And we have to continue to do that. Our devotion to community and the whole must transcend the will of individuals, however. There are those who still wish to divide this community, and that will always be. In a city, in a state, in a nation, that's going to always happen. That's part of the freedom we have in our democracy to disagree and do things, but again, at the end of the day, we have to have those who wish to divide be less recognized than those who wish to put down self-interest and put up our community. And that's what this is all about. That's what we have to do. We must each contribute to our community to achieve that ultimate good that is a community. A real community with a shared notion of identity and common purpose. And we talked a little bit about this objective modeling. In 2 years, objective modeling and what I would call policy-driven planning have opened new doors and provided accountability in government action. Treating people equally and ushering in many changes is a direct result from that accountability. These changes make doing business here more inviting to outsiders. And think about it, we're a little micro version of the state. The first thing that those changes did, and I understand for some they may have wrought havoc, but the first thing ethics changes, tax changes did for outside businesses was give them the first idea, hey, maybe something's different in Louisiana, and it brings in outsiders. The same can be said on a smaller version for Alexandria. Now at first, because some people were used to doing it one way, there's going to be a little pushback. That's to be expected. There's nothing wrong with it, and it's something that we can easily move through and work through, and it shouldn't be an obstacle to further growth. These changes make this, again, doing business better for outsiders. We're seeing those things with additional transparency, but I think there is still a need for more transparency in government decision making. Now, I'm not talking about the obvious. I'm not talking about simply open meetings issues and public records requests. I think those items are by and large met. I'm talking about the way in which planning and development itself occurs. There has to be accountability in that process. People should know and be able to determine objectively how development and planning occurs, how operational decisions are made, how financial policy is debated. Public meetings should not contain surprises. Public meetings should not contain ill-conceived plans. There should be a limitation on the amount of times things are added to agendas at the last minute. And I'm not talking about just at City Hall. I'm talking about everywhere. People should be able to look at an agenda, know what's going to be discussed that day, and get there and do it. Are there exceptions? Of course. There are items that come up that have to be addressed immediately. And in those cases, there should be a publication as to why. There should be the opportunity for public debate about that need, and we move forward. But again, meetings should be the result of well thought out planning, which have been vetted and have been through objective methods and established normal channels of communication. That needs to occur. Objective modeling means there are decision-making tools in place to allow those seeking government partnering, services, and aid to know the rules of the road. Non-governmental organizations called NGOs, and I know we've all been reading the paper and seen all the discussions about NGOs, who got money at the state level and who didn't. We go through those same issues in Alexandria, precisely the same. We also have objective criteria to determine whether to do business with an NGO and what they provide. And we have to continue to make sure that we're looking at things from a public purpose standpoint and giving you, the taxpayers, a return on your investment. I never forget that every incentive or tax dollar we give is spending your money. It's not my money, it's every taxpayer in Alexandria's money. Planners and developers and vendors follow policies on new development. Again, this creates this more even playing field. But there is a lot to do, TW, in terms of unified coding. There's a lot of talk about that, from smart growth proponents to many others, what unified coding does. It's not about placing a new set of rules on people. It's actually about making it easier to do business. It's about knowing this is where I fit, this is what I have to do next. Meryl, we all have been through that, and we know that unified coding is important. And I'm going to tell you this, it is also a natural consequence that coding gets out of whack. Over time, in 20-year cycles or so, over time, different ordinances are passed and things become located in other parts of our code system. So every so often you have to come back in and unify your code. We've done it, I think the last time was probably in the 80s, maybe, and it's time to do it again. It's one of the big proponents, or components rather, of smart growth planning that you'll see from statewide groups. The governor and others will support that, and you'll see that push everywhere you look around at smart development systems, smart development coding, and so forth. Now, what does all that mean to you at home? Sometimes people think, well, that's just all government talk. What does it really mean? It means that if you're in business, again, you know the rules. It also means that as a citizen, you can depend on the fact that future infrastructure will hold up because it was built right and it was planned right to get there. That's what it means to you at home. It means when you put your tax dollar in there, you are getting a return on your investment, just like in any other business setting. You're putting your money up and you're getting a return on that investment. Our infrastructure, when we talk about planning our future, needs attention, ladies and gentlemen. It needs attention very, very much at this point, and I think that that's something we have all probably could do better about informing you and then moving down the road to getting those things fixed. I see Mr. Marcotte here. I think he's well aware of that. We have issues with our utility infrastructure, with all water, sewer, all those things that need to be addressed now. Are we in better shape than a lot of cities? Yes, we are, from good planning in the past. But all cities are experiencing this problem. Mr. Bonnet, indeed, you wrote some articles about that some time back. This is a national problem. The way in which cities are funded has changed in the last 50 years. It went from a large portion of federal dollars funding infrastructure to all of us either doing it through our tax base and doing it through leveraging dollars and partnering with the state and the feds to the extent we can. But think about it. Everyone is scrapping for every dollar now, and it makes it much harder to do that. So our infrastructure does need attention. Roadways need attention in the city, and severance of passages in the city need to be fixed. 40 years of sprawl development in Alexandria has created enormous opportunities for many people. However, for some, at the same time, we have drained significant resources and attention away from Alexandria's historic neighborhoods and inner city. The results are a city which has grown from 9 square miles to over 27 square miles, 3 times the size, with a largely unchanged population. Now we're inching, I believe we're about 49,500 people. So we're getting there. We'd like to break that 50,000 mark. And that means there has been continuous growth. But in practical terms, this means that while the city is significantly larger than it once was, its tax base has not changed enough. Although, I will say this, and I think Mr. Pody would agree, increased business development has caused a fairly steady forward slope over time, or incline over time. So even if you look at waxes and wanes, I would think that our tax base from a business development standpoint has continued, and you see that in the numbers that we produce for where our tax base is. You can check with the parish on that and our own numbers through Mr. Crutchfield's office. So that means we have some issues. You want population and growth to move at a same slope. That's not going to happen always. You have to do things to try to attract people and make your city attractive to people to move to. But at the same time, I believe it is fair to say that increased business opportunity has allowed that tax base to increase too during this same time. So in a way, we have some negatives, but there are some positives that have made us able to handle infrastructure. Growing 3 times the size with the same population, even over time, counting inflation, has not been good for us. And I can't stress that enough. But we're in a better position because we've had a city that has been able to court and maintain businesses. Resources getting spread thinner now and over time will cause us to have continued problems in low-income and working-class neighborhoods getting further left behind. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line of what sprawl models can do if left unchecked. We'll talk about it again shortly, but you can pay for this now, ladies and gentlemen, or you can pay for it later. And my suggestion is if you pay for it later, it's going to cost you a lot more. We're talking about reinvesting dollars. We choose from our position to change now. The ideas for the 3rd Street corridor alone offer a real opportunity at permanent change for a part of the city that has long been not at the table of economic development, I believe, in the same fashion as it should be and as other parts of the city have. I recognize that to some extent folks will say, hey, that's just capitalism. The capitalist model works. If Highway 28 is the corridor, the dollars follow it, that's the way it goes. That is not the case. There have been plenty of incentives in public infrastructure put on Highway 28 to make it attractive, from ballparks to golf courses to other things. You have to be fair when you consider that. There are other ways that public infrastructure can be placed in other parts of the city and have the same effect of attracting business and creating opportunities for people. We have to be mindful of that. It doesn't mean you stop development on 28. It means you encourage development in other places. The promise of this massive reinvestment plan of credit that you have already built up. Spark is not about passing new taxes or taking money and spending it frivolously. It's credit that you've already built up, and we're using that credit. Offers the folks at home a real potential for further increases to our tax base. By attracting and supporting new contributors to our tax base, your dollar will have more value, plain and simple. Spark's no giveaway plan. It's a reinvestment in the business, capital improvement, and according to the federal government and others, it's the best multiplier effect a city can have on its tax base. And I'll tell you why. This is because infrastructure investment and even inner core development, cities who invest in their inner cores have larger returns and multiplier effects than many other forms of development we all assume to be the most effective. Placing new neighborhoods, even mixed-use models and so forth are great. But inner core development, downtown development, and infrastructure, principally, are the best ways that you can have a great multiplier effect on public money spent. And I'll highlight again, infrastructure is king. That's the biggest problem we have in our country. It's going to be the biggest problem that cities face in the next 20 to 30 years, and it's such a big problem, it even affects our competitiveness on an international level with countries like China and other places where emerging markets are dumping massive public dollars into infrastructure. Once thriving and vibrant commercial areas and neighborhoods are suffering the effects of decades of neglect, high crime, blight, disrepair, and a plethora of vacant, abandoned, and adjudicated properties. We must address these now, and we are. Now, to be fair, city officials and community leaders have long recognized the need for reinvesting in suffering areas. And I believe they've spent considerable resources and dollars planning and implementing a redevelopment strategy. Indeed, that's what Spark capitalizes on, using that already vetted planning that's been done. But until recently, I think that we've failed to recognize fully the imperative of addressing contiguous and surrounding areas, which is why the Sparks are designed as corridors, to really provide the impetus for rebounding in a tangible fashion for residents, something residents can see, touch, feel. They know that this is occurring. It gives them the belief that something is happening. It makes them want to own property. It makes them want to stay. And then it finally attracts others to come and invest. Spark addresses our problems in 3 ways. It gives muscle to identified corridors where change has the greatest impact. It provides corresponding and large-scale transportation improvements. And it creates a unique incentive plan capturing value to development up front instead of waiting decades for that achievement. Now, the city of Alexandria in planning terms is ahead of schedule at this point. Fast Track is in fact moving appropriately. Although I think it's fair to say at year's end, after the first year, we're approaching the second year, I believe I was 6 months behind in where I had wanted to be. Coming out of the transition, I think at the end of the first year, we were 6 months behind. But I think with the help of many others, particularly in our state legislative delegation and federal legislative delegation, where we are with Spark now puts us almost a full year ahead of at least where we had started planning 2 years ago. So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, it's a net gain of 6 months. That can quickly be lost, by the way, if you get off track at all in municipal terms. And I remind the folks at home, unlike private business, and I know some developers in the room are smiling and laughing, they know that in the private world, lots of things can happen very quickly, decisions are made. In the municipal world, because of transparency, because of accountability and all the checks and balances, it just takes more time. And that is something that will never change, but it can be done better and more efficiently. We seek to mitigate through Spark through strategic investments in transportation corridors, including 6th and Foisey Streets, to reconnect our downtown to both the east and the west. Spark is certainly not limited to downtown. It also seeks significant reinvestment in other critical transportation corridors. Lee Street and Masonic, which connect downtown to the Alexandria Mall Complex, the Alexandria Zoo, City Park, and the hospital. Bolton Avenue, which once served as the primary commercial corridor and now behaves more like a blighted buffer between downtown and the historic Garden District. That can be changed and should be changed immediately. And North MacArthur Drive, which unwittingly serves as a gateway for those entering and exiting Highway 49 or Interstate 49. That can be changed quickly and very effectively. The plans for Spark were crafted almost, in other words, the putting together of what you already invested and did in-house. And that helped us to keep a promise to you to use consultants sparingly and to take the ideas that were already out there, use the professional staff that you already pay for, and come up with plans. Many of these plans were created less than 15 years ago by consultants. And while they were in need of some update to accurately reflect and respond to the past 15 years of growth, much of what were in those plans was still intact and certainly viable. And I want to thank you, all of you, particularly those who have served in the city for many years, and I want to thank our city council, and this is very important. The city council must be credited for the financial stewardship and the administrative planners that existed well before I came on board that have put us in the position today to move forward as we're able to do. That's why Spark can happen. That's why that AA- occurred. Financial stewardship, good surplus, and good plans and folks in place to show those guys when they came and did the site visit, the agency that rates us, they were impressed. They were impressed with John Grafton, quite frankly, out at the airport, and he did a real good job of showing them. And imagine coming into the city with this ultimate, beautiful gateway that is our airport. It's second to none relative to its size and class. And that was a tremendous boost to us when they were able to fly into that area, spend a half a day or so with Mr. Grafton, look at the master planning out at the England Authority, and have John tell him his history here, of course, as clerk of the city council, and everything else that's been happening. That meant a whole lot to them. The England Authority has been identified by Steve Moray as our area's probably LED, the Louisiana Department of Economic Development, will consider that a principal chess piece, if you will, for economic development in the area. They will probably consider it, Elton, wouldn't you agree, number one for our area. So that means that while we have other things we're trying to do, they consider England still to be a viable piece on the board to move, and indeed we all have plans to try to buttress and help what's going on out there as some of the federal ideas and things that moved England in the past ramp down. We have an opportunity now to say, okay, here are some new things with intermodality that we can look to. And I think that we need to be very mindful of that as we move into the future. We've produced detailed plans for economic growth, for workforce development, and public-private collaboration. We are now putting into play comprehensive plans for recreation and educational growth within the city. Indeed, I was about 5 minutes late coming here. I was meeting with the chancellor from LSUA, and we were talking about just those things. Additional enrichment to educational city collaboration, additional considerations about how the city creeps toward LSUA and how it will creep toward us with student housing and other things that could be on our horizon. We have to consider how infrastructure will meet that. Again, there are always notions about expanding us so that we do expand our tax base, but we have to think about how to smartly do that and pay for that expansion. I believe we have a model incubator in place here. We have a model small and emerging business program. I believe that the implementation phase has frankly taken too long and that we need to do better in that regard. You will see us invest in housing, recreation, and other natural resources and historical interests. You'll see infill investment in areas of blight as a cornerstone of Sparks planning, and we will address those items forcefully. Our incentive proposals will leverage meaningful financial value with the immediate influx of substantial public spending in the form of infrastructure spending and in the form of, again, infrastructure, but more specifically, roadways, connectors, looping, interlooping of our city. This creates the impetus for private investment on a large scale in these corridors, thereby leading to revitalization, investment, partnering, and real change. Activity corridors, transportation corridors, and business incentives. Again, the three parts of SPARK. They work together to enhance identified areas of the city where numerous studies and material already in existence designate the best areas for targeted investment. You also will hear the governor talk a lot about targeted investment. These things are tried and true because folks have objectively found that to be most effective. So if you're looking at reform of capital outlay spending, all of these things, smart cities and smart states, smart governments indeed, should be talking about targeted investment. Again, Spark commences in 2008, and I think that we need to harp on that and remind people of that. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. As you go through this process in elected life, you plan certain things and you think certain items are the most important, and you move through and you make discoveries. It's an ever-changing process, and it's something that you always continue to learn on the job. I remember back when you did the cartoon, Mr. Bonnet, of me holding the hammers and the building codes and everything else. I still have it on my refrigerator. My daughter laughs at it. Of course, in any good caricature, you have to pick out something on a person to highlight, and it was obviously my hair. So on the cartoon, if anybody recalls, my hair is quite large. I've been told I need a haircut today. So community policing and public safety. This is going to be hard to get through in some ways for me, but I believe that we need to address some very specific matters here. To make development safe and desirable, policing must be increased. That means having the right tools and the right dialogue. We will partner with the sheriff in new and innovative crime fighting and prevention activity. You're going to see a lot more of that in the future. We cannot allow people to live in fear of enjoying their home, their own home that they paid for with tax dollars. There's a lady down 3rd Street, not very far from this building, that calls me at home constantly and asks me why she has to live in fear of going home to her house. It is very hard to answer somebody when they ask you that. When she says her age and tells me that she's paid taxes and owns her home and she's afraid to be inside, that's unacceptable, and that's something that we have to change. We can't allow people to live in fear of that when they've worked a lifetime to pay for their home. And we must provide real economic opportunities to folks to avoid the politics and action of desperation, to avoid the politics and actions of desperate people. We have to provide opportunities, but we also have to be tough on crime and making sure that we remove elements that would harm this lady that I'm talking about. Many years ago, I read a novel called The Bridge of San Luis Rey. It was written by Thornton Wilder. He won the Pulitzer, I think, in 1928 for the book. I heard a movie came out a few years back with some big actors. I didn't see it. But this book chronicled the collapse of a suspension bridge in Peru. It's a novel. There's some truth in it, some fact, and some fiction. After the collapse of a bridge, a friar who witnessed it decided he was going to inquire into each of the lives of the people who perished, tens of people who died. He was going to go and chronicle and look at each of their lives to see why, to ask that cosmic question about the reason these people had to die. They're on a pilgrimage. So why did they have to die? Last year, a terrible tragedy in Alexandria made me recall that critically acclaimed novel. It made me recall other personal struggles with the cosmic ordering of things and life and death itself. I know more than ever that we must provide infrastructure in the traditional sense. I know that now more than ever. But public safety is infrastructure. Police are considered infrastructure. They're human infrastructure. We named our post office recently after a fine local citizen, and I thought about him the other day at that event, and I thought about the fine young man and friend that I lost last year, and I was really thinking about it a lot more just about a week or two ago when we had this diesel spill. I thought about how thankful I was that we were working through an emergency which took teamwork and strategy and helped to train us for the next event, but thankfully, it didn't take lives. And that dawned on me the whole time I sat in the Sheriff's Communication Center, that I was sitting here and we were debating about shutting down the AT&T building, what that would mean, and we were going through that. And some folks in the media were saying, well, look, it's diesel, and is that really as bad as other things? And we were going through that whole process, and it really dawned on me how thankful I was that that was the discussion. Almost weekly, my daughter asks my wife about Joey, and those are her words. It seems that she's constantly studying at 4 that tragedy. She goes over it in her mind. It deeply perplexes her. It is anathema to her innocent world. It confronts her understanding of life. Her classmate and neighbor is Joey's son, and she struggles with that other 4-year-old's loss. And they're a boy and a girl, so they're not always on the same page, as you might imagine. But she understands what that means, and I assume because she thinks about her own father and what that would mean. And we don't know that at 4, but it's perplexing to me to watch her work through that process. I have a lot of trouble with Joey and Marty's losses. It reminds me of the bridge of San Luis Rey. I can't let them go without making some commitment to each and every lost opportunity to have prevented that event. Therefore, we are going to look at how our community can respond to seemingly unprovoked rage, what leads to that, what its root causes are, and what we can do to prevent it. To educate the public on behaviors to watch in our co-workers and our family members, and what we can do to stop, interfere, intercede, intervene before these things happen. And finally, to create a dialogue about relations across the socioeconomic and political spectrum of our city. To be sure, racism was not involved in last year's tragedy. However, issues of class and race can lead to such tragedies in the future, and certainly could have and can be involved in the future in tragedies. I intend to start there. It is my intention that someone who has been a great service to our city in an elected and administrative capacity, who is currently the Human Resources Director, but will be joining Lisa Harris on our policy staff, to take on a position to help and aid in that endeavor. We have great hope for that new position. It'll be called Deputy Chief of Policy, and it will be treated as a division head level job and the city's first principal diversity officer. I intend to issue a letter today to the council outlining those job duties and what it means. It will also have further analysis of the job description and what that job will do. This person I have immense trust in. His name is Joe Page, and he's sitting right back here. He has already organized the position into an effective, value-added opportunity for our citizens to interact with their government in a multitude of ways. The city of Alexandria has never had such a position, and it is timely to appoint such an officer as we approach and move into real community-based planning for Spark. Everyone who's affected ought to be at the table having a say about what we do. And that means those who have traditionally been involved in government have to give way and give room to those who have not. The administration is proud to announce its diversity achievements, and some of those will be gone over specifically in that letter to the council. We have a plan. It's called Diversity in Action. It was outlined in my inaugural address, and we have achieved hiring the best and brightest in nearly all of our diversity goals. And if the division heads and folks were to stand up, you would see a reflection of your city, an appropriate reflection, and know that the policymakers and those involved are doing their job and they reflect you. I get questioned a lot about how I think disagreements with the city council in my office or with city council versus city council and other people, how that affects the city. I think the media and pundits and political players can highlight certain issues, and it can sometimes lead us to believe that we're off course. We're not off course. We are guided by plans that have involved many people in this city at the transition time and plans before that. We are guided by our shared past and our heritage. Just because folks disagree sometimes doesn't mean that the city has no charting and is off course. As a matter of fact, when you see folks disagreeing, that's usually a sign of transparency. It's usually a sign of democracy at work. Be careful. Sometimes if you see no disagreement, everybody comes out, everyone's on the same page every day, that sometimes means that things are happening behind closed doors and not in the best way. It is a natural consequence for media folks and even some of us, I guess the insider baseball players that make up politics in the city, all the things that happen downtown, to highlight certain things. But you have to ask yourself, what somebody on Harvard Street thinks, what somebody on Terra Avenue thinks. That's who you have to determine and be a litmus paper, if you will, for what's happening. We must arm ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, with education, and that means cultural education, academic education, spiritual education. We must work together, the council and the mayor, the legislative delegation, the chambers of commerce, and all other folks that are involved in planning our city. Even if there is disagreement, we have to move toward convergence. You have to move toward that goal. Doesn't mean everyone has to agree, but unless something offends moral compasses and other things, once something is decided, everyone has to say, if it's fair, let's toe the line and let's pull that wagon. That's tough to do. It's very tough, but it has to happen. We served as the staging ground for the nation's largest civil rights demonstration in many decades, and we did it peacefully and respectfully. When a symbol of hatred was recklessly strewn behind a pickup truck, we reacted strongly and as a community. This is who we are. This is what we're able to do as Alexandrians. We are a diverse community, a community that works and worships together. When a tragic shooting killed a beloved postman, a man who was known to many of us downtown personally, a man who always carried a smile, whether it was on his route or during his musical performances at Tonks, a shooting that also killed a young, talented attorney, a neighbor and a personal friend of mine, a father to a young family, Alexandria stood together. There are still those in great pain from that event. We prayed together and grieved together, and we endured that event together. We refused to let a random act of violence tear us apart. We refused to be paralyzed by the specter of that event. It was and will always be a painful memory for me and a terribly destructive memory for some dear friends of mine. But we must all remember and acknowledge the incredible work that was done by so many people to try to lessen that pain and try to deal with that event. Today, I'm asking all of you to believe in the power of acting as a community. I'm asking you to believe in your city and each other. Believe in the possibilities of leaving behind a better future. For too long, we have struggled with our collective identity, our sense of purpose and deed. We have been subjected to too much political maneuvering and not enough action. And that's my opinion. But now we demand action and we crave action. And we will act. But we need your help. We must have a bridge suspended and supported the right way to carry our pilgrimage to the other side. We will not suffer as those did in Wilder's novel. We will cross the bridge and celebrate together in our very near future. God bless the city of Alexandria, our state and nation. Thank you very much for listening and coming out. And said, Wendy, get the camera phone or the camera on the phone and take as many pictures as you can, because I couldn't believe it. But the truth is, there are tons of issues when you deal with a boat. For those listening at home, one of the boats involved a person who was deceased, and of course a succession had to be opened, so you have multiple members. Their issues in Destin are the same as ours. When you go to remove property in the public sense, if you don't provide notice the right way to every single person with an interest in that property, they can come back, sue the city, probably win, get damages, and undo a lot of those actions. And so every time we would get closer to doing this, something new would pop up in terms of providing that notice. One boat has been removed. The other is still there. Believe it or not, I've received a few calls, and I saw a letter in the paper once that said we needed to leave the boats alone. They were beautiful and added to the landscape. So everybody's got a position, I guess, on the boats. Our position is that, you know, there's sort of a notion that if you park a boat there, it's your spot. We all laugh, and somebody once coined a term that we all say, and you can't squat the river. The river is a place for all of us to enjoy, and if you have a functioning vessel and you moor it somewhere and it's able to be moved in case of emergency or other things, I don't think the city would ever have a problem with that. But an abandoned boat that could leak things that leach into the ground or leach into the river is not something that I think citizens want to have, and so we will continue in our endeavor to remove those boats. I'm certain that Mr. Johnson can answer that more directly if you ask him after this. Yes, sir, Mr. McNoll.
You know that I cover crime for Channel 5. You touched on some of these issues in your speech. But I think a lot of people out there want to know specifically what you would like to see change about the Alexandria Police Department and the way the city combats drug-related crime on the street.
Okay, good question. I think the first thing that the city needs to do on crime is something that we outlined a year and a half ago, and that is this. You can talk about all the models for prevention in the world. The one tried and true address to crime is the proper amount of police walking a beat on the street. There is no better deterrent, and perhaps there never will be. As technology increases, we obviously have new ways, but getting folks out there is an important thing to do. Developers don't want to be in certain areas because they worry about their investment. If that police presence is there, it helps. The folks in neighborhoods hit hardest by blight, Mike, want a police presence. I think, directly to answer your question, we have to go to the full community policing model. Community policing statistically beats every other method year in and year out nationwide. Now think about what happened. Under the Clinton administration, there were a ton of cops put on the street with the money that was done. Years later, the money was pulled back, so it becomes, in essence, an unfunded mandate. At least we feel that way as communities. We need that same amount of police out there. We saw drastic, giant statistics in crime show a decrease in the parts where you want to see it. Violent crime, even nonviolent, but could be violent crime, breaking into homes, that kind of thing. Now that's gone up because cities can't afford these community policing models. Alexandria is in decent shape right now. There's a lot of debate, I guess, at the council level when we talk about how many police should be there, what we should spend. We don't have enough out there. I've asked Darren the chief to put together statistical evidence of how you compare other cities. To be frank with all of you, it's been difficult. You always get this apples and oranges comparison. Kay McGill's is now working on a model to have an outside group come in and look at that. It's run by former chiefs or current chiefs. I also want to have other folks kind of independent from that look at what they do, and then we want to implement it. I think, Mike, it's fair to say that we need to move more quickly. I think your question is very appropriate in that regard. The other thing is there are investment opportunities in new models. there are prophylactic measures that can be taken, preventive measures. That is always going to be something meaningful. But preventing violent crime and those things does not, that's not the model. That model is spending money on officers. There are other things that you can do to combat drug crime that does call for investment in our social infrastructure. The other thing from an operational standpoint that the sheriff and I have been talking about is revamping a true unified drug task force. And I can tell you in one sentence why it's important. They share intelligence. The biggest way to combat drug crime is through shared intelligence. It's through all the agencies in an area sharing it. You don't want to have folks working a CI, a confidential informant, in one area, and the other agency arresting that CI in another area, when if they were sharing information, they would be working together. And without going too much into it from that end, and we'll be glad to talk to you more about it later, Mike, that's one thing that we can do. The other thing, the third thing I would say, we need more partnering, and I believe the sheriff and I will move into that. And when I say partnering, I mean something very different. Shared infrastructure, shared public infrastructure. Imagine, if you will, an area of blight that we want to change, and just imagine putting a joint RPSO, APD substation. Doesn't have to be large and fancy, but a nice substation to anchor an area where we want public money to go, and then we're asking you to come invest. Imagine those guys going out on bicycles in community policing every day, talking to the folks in the neighborhood, finding out what the issues are. It changes everything. That's how, when we talk about getting a post office in an area, getting food in an area, retail, that's how you attract that. And that's something that I think you're going to see us move into. And again, the question's not only fair, it's something that signals what I believe is really on people's minds at home. Talk about the guy on Terra Avenue or Harvard Street, that's what they want to know. We all love to talk about